translated, simultaneous translation in French and Spanish. So if you can all click on the language you would like to listen to this, either French, English, or Spanish. So even if you want to listen to this in English, you must choose the language. Je vais traduire en français. Si ce webinaire sera traduit en français et en espagnol, donc quelle que soit la langue que vous souhaitez, euh, vous devez sélectionner la langue que vous voulez écouter. Este webinar va a ser traducido en inglés, francés y español. Si quieres escuchar en otro idioma, tienes que seleccionar en More el idioma que quieres escuchar. Okay, next slide. So this webinar will be translated, will be recorded. So thanks for bearing that in mind. Please, once again, select the language in which you would like to hear this webinar. Use the chat to share questions, reflections, and comments. If you would like to make a comment or ask a question, please raise your hand and open your mic. And please all be mindful that we will try and time keep this webinar and keep your contribution concise. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first two speakers today, our Global Shelter Cluster Coordinator, Seki Hirano from UNHCR, and Pablo Medina from IFRC. Over to you.
Thank you, Caroline, and welcome everybody. Hi, Pablo. Can you believe it, Pablo, that it's been 20 years anniversary it is. And in some countries, they call it a platinum anniversary. Pretty precious metal, isn't it? So, hey, Pablo, what were you doing 20 years ago?
My God, 20 years. That makes us feel a little bit old, doesn't it, Seki? I was actually in Sri Lanka, and I was leading the Spanish Red Cross response to the tsunami. And right at about this time, we were all getting very nervous that we were going to do 1 year, we were going to mark the 1 year since the tsunami, and not one single house had been rebuilt. And we of course, we knew that recovery takes time, but the press, the media, the government, there was a lot of pressure to show results. Eventually, we did manage to rebuild a few houses on time with the Sri Lanka Red Cross. And I remember when we were about to hand over the houses, they were like, but there is no furniture, there is nothing. And that brought to me the idea of how important essential household items and NFIs are to live your normal daily life within the houses. There were a lot of things that have improved since. Coordination was limited, there were no clusters. Obviously, there were some efforts to coordinate, but I remember most of the coordination happened directly between the responding agencies and the government officials at the municipal and national level. And it was a bit chaotic, to be honest. But yeah, that was a long time ago. And Seki, where were you 20 years ago?
Yeah, I was actually across the ocean to you 20 years ago. I was in a little village called Lamno in Indonesia after the tsunami as well, rebuilding kind of whole villages, thousands of homes. Again, this was like without a cluster system in place, and kind of now I look back, we had a lot of funds, but very little community engagement, DRR or construction management systems, like very kind of, ad hoc kind of systems. And I remember, it just kind of brings me back to many people maybe on this call as well, like remembering kind of rebuilding houses that we had built already. So and sometimes several times actually, because quality was not good, the location was not good, etc. And I remember we competing between agencies, finding communities to serve. If we look back at that kind of weird things such as kind of offering incentives like having a bigger house or better house or more kitchens so that we can kind of gain access to the communities type of thing. So it was pretty chaotic actually. So yeah. So yeah, Pablo, yeah. So this week, pretty special week. Why are we here?
Well, I think, Seki, we need to celebrate 2 decades of humanitarian shelter coordination. There is a lot that we have collectively achieved together as a partnership. And that is, I think, at the core of the cluster approach, the partnership. How the challenges we face cannot be met by any one single agency. And we come together to be better at meeting those challenges. So we have a lot to celebrate for this during these 2 decades. But we also have to reflect on the lessons that we have learned and evolving practices for the past 2 decades, because by learning these lessons, we can move forward to this new cluster doing things better. And I think it's important to co-create the next chapter of coordination together, reflecting on these lessons. And finally, we hope to engage through dynamic sessions, lightning talks, lessons learned exchanges, and dialogues focused on the future. And that engagement depends on all of us to be able to have this wonderful week of celebration, reflection, and co-creation. So, Seki, what are you looking forward to this week?
I think like the whole week, really. As you can see on the schedule here, we're going to start with the chronology of 20 years, and then tomorrow we'll go on the shaping the shelter, the roles of standards and policies, and then Wednesday we have building shelter coordination response capacities. So we'll hear a lot of stories and insights into the next generation. Thursday, strategies from strategies to field realities, all about the operational support and delivering together. And then the last day, on Friday, we got a 2-hour session and shaping the new humanitarian cluster, really capturing what we've learned throughout these 20 years and through this week, and really discuss what comes next. So I'm really excited about this week. And also, just to say, there's going to be a podcast series coming through as well throughout the week. We're going to capture a few periods of the cluster recorded as a podcast. So keep an eye out on that.
Thank you, Seki. So as we move on, I just want to introduce 2 gentlemen who hardly need any introduction. Neil Bowman and Jean Kennedy. They have been with us in the sector for the past 2 decades as well. Neil Bowman is the global focal point for information management and for capacity building with the Canadian Red Cross, part of the Global Shelter Cluster Support Team. Jean Kennedy is currently the global focal point for research with the Global Shelter Cluster Team, funded, seconded from Habitat for Humanity. And they will take us through the webinar today and through the last 2 decades of shelter cluster coordination. So over to you, Neil and Jim.
Thank you, Pablo and Seki.
Thank you.
Yeah. So just, I guess, to cover some of the things that we would like to cover over this particular hour and a half session. We want to celebrate the accomplishments of the people that have been part of the shelter cluster and the partnerships with all the agencies that have been involved. We don't want to forget the people who are no longer with us. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about those who are no longer with us. Then we will be spending a little bit of time around a number of different themes that have dramatically changed over the last 20 years in the humanitarian sector. One is around information management. So a number of myself and a number of other colleagues are going to discuss the processes and approaches to how we use information management has changed over the last 20 years. Jim's going to talk a little bit about some of the the acronyms that we use in our our discipline. There are so many, and the length and types of acronyms have changed. So Jim will be covering that. And then a very good session from led by Carolyn Duast around the women in the shelter sector, the growth of the role of women in our sector, which has changed remarkably. And then Jim is going to close off and look at how technical coordination has evolved over the last 20 years. And then we'll close off and start talking about the next sessions coming up. So I'll hand over to you now, Jim.
Great. Thank you so much, Neil. Before we lead into the other parts of this webinar, and before we go on through the rest of the week of celebrations, we'd like to take a few minutes to also remember and to celebrate colleagues and friends who we remember well, but who are no longer with us. There are obviously many thousands of those households, those individuals who we've worked with, who we have supported with shelter and settlements, who have also passed away, who have been killed. And we'd like to pause to remember them as well. I know that each one of us has been touched by colleagues who have passed away. Very often, colleagues who've passed away in the line of duty whilst working to save lives, working for their humanitarian organisations. I'm going to share a few slides, which are some photos which we have managed to collect of colleagues who had been our colleagues and friends inside the Global Shelter Cluster, and to say a few words of thanks and memory. I'd like to firstly do two things. I want to thank all of the families and friends who have shared the photos with us and have been kind enough to share their own memories. So I'll try and read some of those out. But also, I would like to invite everybody here today. I know that the slides that we are showing are not complete. Please, if you would also like to contribute in the chat to share names and memories of others of our friends and colleagues who have passed away, or to share any other fond memories. And remember this, I hope, will be celebratory, fond memories of those who are included in the slides. I would really love to be able to continue to gather these fond and very precious memories of those who have worked with us and those who have contributed so much. Next slide, Pablo. Sorry, Neil. The first is Steve Barker, who I met quite a few years ago. I think actually in one of the trainings where the photos are coming from. I just wanted to read a quick message actually from Steve's wife, Liz, who says, in 40 years of knowing my husband, he had twinkling eyes, kind, mischievous fun. He was an encourager, and knowledge wasn't power, but to be shared. He was an academic and gained a doctorate by dissertation, concurrently with working in Rwanda in the years post-genocide in 1994. He was an engineer through and through, and so as an academic at university, he inspired students and was passionate about problem solving with engineering applications across the globe. And Steve worked in the shelter cluster in a number of countries, and I think was extremely important for all of us. Both his sense of humor and his sense of encouragement, but also technically the way that he was able to bring a lot of WASH knowledge into our working together. Neil, next slide. Graham Saunders was the person I think who did more than anybody else to firstly set up the shelter cluster and to give the shelter cluster the direction and a strategic vision which it still has today. Graham, I first met in 2005 in Sri Lanka. Graham was the person who was able to give the architecture to the global shelter cluster to make it inclusive, to come up with ideas like having local hubs at the national level, but also establishing the strategic advisory groups and the technical working groups at the global level, which really were able to provide then the support to each national cluster, which was promised originally in the humanitarian reform. Graham was also somebody I'm sure who everybody knows had an amazing sense of humor. I think the two things I would like to share about Graham from a personal point of view. One was that he once asked about my job availability by coming up to me in the urinal in the IFRC toilets and saying, "Jim, what are you up to?" The other one was the very first time I met him. We were supposed to be talking about establishing a partnership together, and it ended up spending the whole time almost being kicked out of a restaurant in Sri Lanka for dancing on our chairs to old English 1980s pop music. Neil, next slide, please. Guillaume was a freelance architect and humanitarian specialist. He was on deployment in Ecuador, but he was also one of the main contributors to the Shelter Projects books. I've included here as well as the photos of Guillaume and Guillaume with his Ecuador team, a sketch. Guillaume was somebody who was incredibly visual and who was able to put that visualization and his graphic skills to very good humanitarian use as well, coming from his architectural background. Next, Neil. Felix de Vries, I saw that Felix's family have also joined as participants and audience here. I would like to thank them for that. These are three photos of Felix. I also knew Felix for a long, long time. Felix worked for primarily the Red Cross, Netherlands Red Cross, but was also part of the technical coordination team in a number of countries, ranging from Mosul to the Caribbean, as these photos testify. Felix was also very passionate about technical development and outreach to the private sector. I remember one of the last times I was speaking with Felix before he passed away was actually at a special conference between the humanitarian sector and the steel industry, hosted in Luxembourg. And Felix, in a sort of large, very formal setting, was, I think, the one person who made me laugh the entire time. Next one. Petya. Talking of laughing, I think I included the photo on the left-hand side of Petya smiling and laughing. Petya was somebody who was able to bridge very much the relationship between the global shelter cluster and all of the different national areas who national responses where Petya was also deployed, and was somebody. Unfortunately, the photo wasn't high enough quality, but there is a photo of Petya in the memorial page, which was set up shortly after she passed away, of Petya with her entire team singing karaoke. And I think this is the liveliness and the amazing sense of energy that she brought and was able to use in her communications between both the global level and also her work in Iraq and elsewhere. Again, I'd like to thank everybody for all of the expressions of love that I'm seeing coming up onto the screen. Um, we really, I can't say how much we and myself personally have valued and have regretted the passing of all of those who we have shared photos with. I would like again to thank all of the families and friends who have contributed to this. It's been an incredible time to be able to exchange messages and memories with them. And please, everybody, I see that Leanne has put a message about Guillaume. I'd like to read that out. Guillaume was a truly rare talent and a rare friend. How lucky we were to share our first roles in a cluster together in Ecuador back in 2016, where we quickly formed a close bond. An incredible artist and skillful colleague, but also endlessly generous human. He embodied that extraordinary combination of brilliance and kindness. His warmth, his humor, his ability to turn even a vicious dog attack into a story that still brings a laugh made him really unforgettable, and he is greatly missed. Um, and I know that Renee, who I was in contact with to get some of the photos, is also remembering Petya. I still feel like those moments could jump into life and we would still be laughing and catching up as if no time has passed. And thank you, Pablo, also for remembering Graham as a mentor. And I would like to echo that. He was somebody who was a mentor, he was somebody who was an encourager, and he was somebody who was a teacher, and he was somebody who was a sharer. Thank you so much. I know that we can continue with these memories, but I would like to pass back to Neil and to Fio and to move on to the first other main section of our chronology discussions for the rest of this webinar. And thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jim. That was great. Pio, are you online? Pio? Okay. He might join. Um, okay. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Neil Bowman. I've been with the Global Shelter Cluster for 20 years now. My first job was with the shelter cluster in Pakistan in 2005, and I haven't left. I've been doing information management with the shelter cluster for that entire period of time. I guess in this section on IM, I thought we would just discuss a little bit about some of the shifts in how information management has changed over those 20 years. Specifically, I'd like to talk about a little bit about how technology has evolved over those 20 years and how it has become a much more of a recognized, professionalized component of humanitarian response. And along with that, the shelter cluster has had a number of partnerships that we would like to highlight, and the ways that information management has been specialized over the 20 years. Um, One of the other areas is around how information management standards have developed and how there's a great amount of guidance and mentorship that's available out there. And ultimately, that the function of information management has been about improving how we analyze the situation. And I'd like to sort of just highlight a few of the key partners that have been involved in improving how we analyze humanitarian situation, but also specifically about the shelter situation itself. So those of you who are old like me, you might remember that in the olden times we used to do a lot of things on paper, and I remember in Pakistan we did an assessment, and it was for mapping informal settlements, informally settled areas of displaced people, and we set out a bunch of enumerators to go out and uh, they would send back to Islamabad. We had piles and piles of paper, and we had to process that information. I ended up having to hire, I think, 20 or 25 different people to spend a week entering the data from that paper into Excel so that we could do some sort of statistical analysis of the data that came back. And ironically, the analysis for that took much less time than the data entry. And we've come a long way since then. And I know that was probably a turning point. Well, I guess the tsunami period was a turning point in how it was recognized that the information about the situation was vital to how to develop and create a strategy for the response. Since then, the technology around mobile data collection tools and GIS and remote sensed information has exploded. I mean, the availability of digital data has come so far that it's now the sort of primary source of how we use information, but also process it, and the amount of time has and the quality of the products has increased enormously. Um, Along with that, when information management started to really take root as a required and vital part of humanitarian disciplines, there was an explosion of different support organizations that would take on a specialized role within the spectrum of types of information that needed to be processed and analyzed. Um, uh, we, the I think it was probably around Haiti in 2010 when the idea of crowdsourcing and sharing the burden of how we process and assign attributes in maps was done. Ushahidi was a quite a famous initiative at the time, and the the role of information management can be quite broad. An information manager is responsible for data collection, but also storing that data and putting it into databases and creating some sort of analysis. And so the amount of the competencies that these people brought with them, and I'm not one of them, by the way. The people who do the work in these organizations are very technically talented, and I wanted to sort of highlight a couple of the partnerships that we've had in the shelter cluster that had fundamentally changed how we conduct shelter coordination. And the first one is around the Reach initiative, which I believe it was around probably 2011 or so. I'm probably wrong on that, but Luca Pupulin started the Reach initiative through Impact Initiatives. And we've had a long-standing partnership with them, both in terms of providing remote support for doing analysis, but also field level uh, conducting of assessments, which is in itself a very specialized discipline. And we've been able to leverage uh, that specialty quite well over the last number of years. And the other one I think that is quite fundamental for how the shelter cluster has been working is the DTM, the IOM-led DTM project around mapping and having a deeper understanding of the intentions and the hurdles that displaced people face in humanitarian response. And as you know, displacement is a key part to how we understand human settlement. And so I just wanted to sort of highlight those two organizations specifically, along with, the great support we've had with OCHA and the IM working groups that have been established both at global level and at country level to get all of the clusters to work in a coordinated way around information management and share information. Um, Another big change is how information has been standardized. We've moved very deep into how we share data openly, and I guess I did want to sort of mention that OCHA has been a quite a leader in that open source access to information. The specifically, I think the HDX, the Humanitarian Data Exchange platform, has really changed how we're able to rapidly collect certain sets of data in a standardized way so that we can rapidly join things together. I don't know how many people on the call are even aware of the idea of what a P code is, but having having a standardized way to be able to call Springfield Springfield, and knowing that there's, seven Springfields, we're able to know which one is which and combine that data so that we can have a fairly rapid analysis of the situation. So I believe that HDX is a real key tool to humanitarians, and very much looking forward to seeing that continue.
Hi, Neil. Neil,
Yeah. Yes.
I'm online. Sorry, I was
Ah.
online the half part. I didn't cut in. Sorry. Thanks for
Oh,
taking
there you
over.
are.
Sorry, Neil. Yes.
Okay, no problem. Do you want to take over for here?
Sure. No worries. I can introduce myself.
Yeah.
So, my name is Pyo Weijia. I've worked with the shelter cluster before, I started in this line of information management, not understanding what it was to begin with. So Neil was one of my mentors, and sorry, I'm cutting in late, Neil. I guess going on your discussion about the humanitarian data exchange, I think just the idea that, open data is not optional anymore, and it's more like a multiplier impact that it gives to the work we do. Because I think in the beginning, when we used to do this thing, we used to go to the different offices just to get any type of data, whether it be on paper or anything, and we would just type into these Excel sheets with enumerators, whatever it may be, and not knowing that data is standardized and not standardized, and we would do the best with what we can. So I think this advancement of open data being available to all of us has really helped us come up with more analysis. So
I don't know
just wanted to
about you,
chime in.
but how many USB sticks do you have sitting on your desk that's filled up with from going around to everyone's desk and just
And
grabbing it?
don't forget the viruses, the
And the
potential to
viruses.
get viruses.
Sure.
So you had to be faithful to the drives you were taking it to, so, and not infect others as well. So yes,
Absolutely.
definitely we've
Yeah.
leaps and bounds for sure. Like just having the ability to use API to connect to different data sources to be able to layer it, it's an advantage. This is something that was a luxury back in the day. I sound
Hmm.
old, but that's how it was. I think we
That's
even had
right.
the yeah, so I guess anyone with data back in the day was our friends.
Yeah. And friends don't send friends PDFs.
That's true. That's true. Back in the day, you had to actually type those out. You couldn't
That's
just
right.
convert it. So it's
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Thanks for letting me chime in. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about analytics and how we have advanced uh, what it is that we want to know, or how we and how we process that information. I back in the olden times, the calculation of need even was something more, I guess, mathematical, or it was an accounting process where we would use the number of damaged houses, and that would equate to the need, and then we would count the number of buckets and the number of tarps and the number of CGI sheets that would have been distributed, and somehow use I guess an accounting process to determine what the gaps were. And that, I mean, that was such a uh, amateur, I guess this is the word I would use, way of describing the change that happens through humanitarian interventions. And I think we have matured that system quite a lot in the last 20 years, especially. Um, we're lucky that we have some great thinkers in other organizations, and I just want to mention the IPC tools that the World Food Program uses to determine the level of severity of need for uh, food and nutrition. That tool became the grandfather to a lot of thinking that happened in the rest of the humanitarian sector, and then to the shelter cluster. Uh, the inform indexes were a way to use normalized data to understand the respective vulnerability that different countries have, and there's even a sort of a subnational level of analytics that they've been able to do around describing where vulnerabilities are. But when the IPC really took hold, the rest of the clusters recognized its value, and when the GF initiative was formed and led by OCHA, which is the Joint Intersectoral Analysis Framework, the shelter cluster at that time developed its shelter severity classification tools, and are I believe very powerful tools to describe need in a different way, to describe where priorities are, what sectors are lacking, and how people are vulnerable, rather than just quantifying it in terms of the number of damaged houses. One of the great values, I think, that we're going to see some great improvement over the next few years, and we've already seen some of it, is around anticipatory action. And I think some of these tools are very well placed to give us a heads up, but also an advanced humanitarian action, particularly around natural disasters, as the prediction of some of these events is becoming more well, easier. I just wanted to sort of quickly note that some of the analysis that we do at the global level, the great Audrey Galicier has pulled together a lot of the data around where the cluster has been working over the last 20 years. We've worked in 60 countries. Can you believe that? Um, and these are not for short periods of time, for an average of 8 years, but uh, many have been going on the entire time, these protracted crises. Um, but this is the type of analysis that we're able to perform now at the global level, because we have a more standardized and coordinated way of reporting at the global level, from country to country to the global. and describe things in a consistent and common way. I'll just sort of close. This is a graph of the amount of people that have been reached through shelter and NFI programs, data going back to 2016. And you can see that the number of people targeted is far above what we're able to reach. But the goal is through better analysis, we can be more efficient with the resources that we do have. And just a final shot here. This is of the shelter severity classification tool, which is a tool in process where we're able to compound a number of different data types to identify where people are most vulnerable to shelter using the SSC framework, but also underlying vulnerabilities, as well as where hazards are, to do a calculation of where we should be prioritizing our activities and what those activities should be. So I think those of you who will be working with us and going forward, we hope that we'll be seeing a little bit more of this going forward. That's it from my side. I wanted to hand over to Hussein Ahmed. Hussein, are you on the call?
I'm here. Hi, Neil.
Fantastic. Great. So I'll just introduce Hussein. Hussein is my counterpart with UNHCR, and he's pretty much the brains behind the outfit. And I'd asked him to step in and talk a little bit about the future of information management, and particularly how maybe AI is going to transform the shelter sector, but the humanitarian sector as well. Over to you, Hussein.
Thank you, Neil. Hello, everyone. Actually, after this overview, after this chronological timelines that Neil and Theo presented, I have no better idea to start with except to say it's happening again. Information management is changing again, one more time. But this time is deeper, the change is deeper, is not about a new tool, it's not about a new system, it's not about a new framework. Actually, we are stepping into a new era of information management. I call it AI era, agentic era, probably, we can call it like that. And it is the first time where we have systems that understand, reason, analyze, and probably proactively act together with us. And that will open doors for us that 2 years ago, just 2 years ago, were probably like dreams, sci-fi, or something like that. So a little bit of what we can do with this new era. Like imagine that you can now instantly understand all the incoming information, whether they're coming in a report, assessment, email, WhatsApp. Instantly you have the analysis of that information, the trends, the locations, the needs, the risks, etc. All instantly. You don't need to do all of this data cleaning, etc. It's happening all at once in a blink of eye. And so this will transform analysis from being ad hoc or being planned on periodic to be instant, to be continuous. Instead, you will have it dynamic instead of being monthly, for example. And this will allow us for better insights, better actions, and better decisions. And we are not starting anymore from scratch. Every single draft that we prepare today is ready. Your CHREPs, gap analysis, scenarios, risk analysis, briefing summaries, donor briefings, etc. You have the first draft already at hand. But this will happen only in a conversation manner instead of construction. We don't have instructions anymore. It's just a conversation between us and the system. That give me this and give me that. Can you construct this fact sheet for me that I will use for this X donor or for that X audience and so on. And the fact sheet will be there. And finally, this new era will retain information, will retain knowledge. Because in humanitarian system, we have a lot of turnover, as we know. And when we have the institutional memory within the system that they can interact with us, we are sure that everything about previous analysis, trends, partner tools, context, etc., will be persistent with us as we move throughout the crisis, especially with the trends that we have seen. Some of the clusters were alive for 20 years. So what does that mean in terms of a humanitarian work? So if we look at what Neil has shared, so if the information management one was manual with all of the paperwork, and information management two was data-driven with standards, systems, and governance, the information management three will be collaborative, not a human to human, but a human to system and system to human. And here's the key. This transformation is not about IMOs, it's about everyone. Coordinators, program leads, project managers, field officers, partners, even the community that we serve themselves. All we collaborate into this system. Anyone who can ask a question in a plain natural language is part of this new system, can access the analysis, can construct the analysis, can feed into it, and can contribute to the context memory that we are feeding into these systems. And here I find one good analogy actually that I will use. We are not building systems that replace human. We are not building Iron Man robots. We are building an Iron Man suit, a suit that will give us more clarity, more speed, more analytical reach, more situational awareness, and more time for judgment and relationships that we miss these days. And this doesn't replace the human. This actually amplifies the human power. So AI becomes a suit, and we become the heroes inside the suit. So as we move at the end to this section, actually, I'll just conclude with this idea. The next decade of humanitarian information management will not be about who knows more tools or more systems or more technology. It will be about, or it will be defined by those who are willing to explore, to ask, and to pilot this suit, actually. For those who are curious, courage, brave enough to try, and humble enough to learn, and brave enough to reshape the way we work. If we embrace this shift today, together, not perfectly, but just instantly, with openness, with experimentation, with curiosity, we will not build only smarter tools. Actually, we are making our humanitarian response more human. And here is not to replace our roles, it's enlarging them, it's giving us new reach, new possibilities, and new capacities. Thank you.
Terrific. A very nice, optimistic look at the path forward on this. Thank you, Hussein. And I really want to thank you for the many years of thought that you've put into this and the shelter cluster. So thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I think I'm going to hand over to Jim, and we'll talk a little bit about the acronyms of shelter. If there are questions or comments around information management, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll try and get to responding to them, or Hussein or Fio or can help as well. All right, thank you. Over to you, Jim.
Sure. Actually, Neil, could you just close this slide sharing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
To share everybody. I don't know if everybody can see my screen. This is a 15-year-old T-shirt from the Haiti Shelter Cluster of 2010. And the reason I'm showing this is that when Neil and I wanted to put this session together, we thought that we'd find some interesting entry points into the chronology of the last 20 years, things which were not sort of an obvious year by year development of how we've done or how we haven't done. And so one of the things we thought about was how acronyms and a change of acronyms reflect how we have done and how we have thought and what we have thought as being more and more important or less important over the last 20 years. I'm going to turn this around. This T-shirt is the acronym T-shirt. Luckily, I don't have to hold it up the whole time. Neil, could you put the slides back on and move to the next slide? So this T-shirt, which we are we were showing, is our own dearly beloved alphabet spaghetti, and we want to talk about how it's evolved over the last 20 years, what that says about the shelter and settlement sector, and how cluster coordination has also evolved at the same time. The list on this The list of the acronyms on the T-shirt is, I think, impressively long. I just want to spend a couple of moments using the T-shirt and the list to point out what is on the list and what isn't on the list. Thank you. Stay with that photo. And what has changed in the meantime between 2010 or before and 2025. Firstly, if we are talking about acronyms, it's worth pointing out, I think, that this T-shirt was made for the ESC, not the GSC, as the shelter cluster didn't change from being the emergency shelter cluster to being the global shelter cluster until 2011. And although even before 2010, there were already, I think, a lot of debates within the cluster about how much further than emergency phase shelter programming and shelter coordination should go. But by 2010, by the time of this T-shirt, the acronyms which shelter clusters were dealing with, at least in Haiti, included a number from national government ministries or government agencies tasked with being part of the response. That was a good development. And as you can see, at least some of the acronyms are in French, although the spelling out of them reverts back to English. Then I would start by saying there's some acronyms on the T-shirt for things which are already in existence well before the Haiti response. SAG, the Strategic Advisory Group, and TWG, the Technical Working Group, were both actually used by the very first national shelter cluster in Pakistan in 2005. And then there are the acronyms which have changed over the last 15 years. So there is EMMA, Emergency Market Mapping Analysis, which was first developed by Oxfam in 2008. But there's no CALP, there's no Cash Learning Platform, which was only started in 2011. And so none of the other cash and markets acronyms like CBI or CVA, which came out a number of years later. There's also no CWG, Cash Working Group. And although there are acronyms for single specific types of assessment, PDNA, there's no acronyms for the overarching process of collecting and analyzing the data. The acronyms which would evolve, starting off as M&D, then MEL, and then MEAL, to reflect better the participation of affected communities in those processes. And in terms of the support for everything, funds and advocacy for funding. We do have on the T-shirt acronyms for the short phase emergency funds, which were in existence in 2010, SURF and ERRF, but there's no reference to the more sustainable and predictable HRPs or RRPs, humanitarian response plans or regional response plans, which have come into existence and have evolved, I think, quite a lot since 2010. There's a number of acronyms which are totally missing from the shirt. A number of them are cross-sectoral, but they are very, very closely related to shelter. And they speak to how we've attempted to identify and support those who are most in need of shelter. So there's no GBV or SGBV acronyms. And this might reflect the fact that in the 2004 edition of Sphere, which was still current in 2010, the word gender simply doesn't appear in the Sphere chapter minimum standards common to all sectors. And it's only used twice in the entire shelter and NFI chapter. And it was only in 2011, after this T-shirt was made, that there was a gender cross-cutting issue highlighted in Sphere, and gender ended up being used 52 times throughout the handbook. And even though Haiti was the start of some extremely good programming for shelter being built with and for persons with disabilities, that's not on the T-shirt either. So no PWD, PWD, WG, no OPD, organizations for persons with disabilities. But again, this may be reflective of the times that the word disabled only appears 3 times in the Shelter and NFI chapter of Sphere, then in use, but appears 99 times in the one that comes after. And then one last area, which I think is extremely important to show how the shelter sector and the shelter coordination has evolved over the last 15 years, is the addition between the T-shirt and now of all of the acronyms, which show how we communicate with, listen to, and work with communities, from CWC to CCCE to AAP. And that has all been a development and an evolution from the T-shirt on the time. And I just wanted to say, this isn't to say that these things weren't being done during the Haiti response. They often were, with some good examples. But the areas where the shelter sector and the global shelter cluster have chosen to raise the profile and hopefully raise its own game over the last 15 or 20 years is shown this way, even if it's only one way. And the only way to show it is to revert to the sort of the dreaded acronym alphabet spaghetti. If you can think of any other evolutions of acronyms, or if anybody has even longer acronyms that they would like to put into the chat now, please feel free to do so. And I'd like to pass back to Neil.
Thanks, Jim. Now I'm going to hand over to Caroline. Caroline is going to lead a discussion on the women in the shelter sector. Are you there, Caroline?
Yes, I'm here.
All right.
Thank you very much. So this part of this will be a short discussion with a few panelists that we have online about the role of women in the shelter sector and in shelter cluster coordination and how that has evolved over time. So maybe a few words of introduction. When we started organizing this event, we realized, especially in the early days, that there were very few women represented in shelter cluster meetings at the global level within the Global Shelter Cluster Strategic Advisory Group. We're trying to make each of these webinars have a representation, a gender balance, and we found it very difficult to find women who were on pictures of our meetings. But I wonder if this is actually true. I wonder if there was no women in the shelter sector, or they were simply not present in coordination meeting because they weren't in management position. So this is a first prompt for this conversation here. Were there no women in the shelter sector 20 years ago, or were they just not visible? The other thing I wanted to mention is I did a bit of research about maybe a bit more broadly of women in the humanitarian sector. And I noticed that there's a very active Facebook group called Humanitarian Women Network that was created in 2016, and that brought together women from all walks of life who are working in the humanitarian sector. And that space, that group allowed for a number of conversations to happen about contract, about gender discrimination, about the career prospect for women in the sector. But I think a few women who were specifically working in the shelter sector felt that, the shelter sector is a bit unique. And we created our own community, our own group in 2020. It's a quite active, lively WhatsApp group called Awesome Shelter Women, and it also has a LinkedIn page. And this has really created a safe space for women in the sector to share, to communicate about some of the challenges they've faced entering the sector or evolving in the sector, and particularly talking about some of the challenges of being a woman when you have caring duties or you have projects of becoming a mother and how that impacts your career. In 2021, the group organized a survey, which was then presented at the UK Shelter Forum, and you can find that online. I'll post the link of the video on the chat in a minute. And this survey highlighted quite a number of striking figures. About 55% of the respondents experienced gender discrimination at work. So, this is half of our women colleagues and women potentially connected to this webinar today. Just maybe pause and think what that means. But on the other hand, I think something very positive is 63% of respondents mentioned that having women in shelter team has positively impacted shelter programming. And you can realize that most of the people we serve are women. A lot of the time we select the most vulnerable population, and in many contexts, these are single-headed households, single woman-headed households. And so you can imagine having a team that include women, a team of shelter women, a team of shelter staff that includes a women, will mean that the people we serve, the women who will be receiving our support, will feel that her specific concerns are more heard. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce our 3 panelists today. So maybe if your internet connection allows, I know some of you are having some internet issues, but we have 3 wonderful panelists today to start opening up a discussion. So first we have Sandra Durzo, Senior Officer, Shelter, Climate, Environment, and from the Resilience Unit at the IFRC. We also have with us Basma Shara from Yemen Family Care Association, a professional expert in shelter and program development. And we have Marta Kaudonko, a former shelter cluster coordinator in Yemen and a number of other contexts, I believe, and currently the head of sub-office with UNHCR in South Sudan. So welcome, dear panelists. We've prepared a number of questions because obviously I want to hear from you and your experience in the sector. And if I can start with you, Sandra, thinking back at when you first entered the shelter sector, what did it look like for being a woman, for being a woman in the sector in terms of your role, in terms of leadership, and how seriously your technical voice was taken? Can you share maybe some early experiences that could illustrate that time? Thank you.
Yes, good morning, Caroline. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, first of all, for having me on such a special occasion today. I promise not to be too emotional, as I see there's so many fond memories coming up and changes coming together. I would ask you not to look at me, but just close your eyes maybe for 10 seconds and try to remember the moment that you decided what your professional journey when your professional journey would take a different direction, or a moment that felt exactly the place where you were meant to be in your professional lives of conscious change or fulfillment. I promise this not a meditation session or spiritual, but I think that each of us felt this during this journey. And I would wish to take you in 5 minutes just over mine as a shelter expert, as a humanitarian worker, and as a mother and partner in life. So I guess my moment, if you can reopen your eyes, was just the tsunami 2004. Some colleagues, Pablo mentioned it, Neil as well, deploying to Sri Lanka myself in February 2005. So that's just over these 20 years ago. Being a woman in construction industry was hard enough, I would say. I mean, I was coming from a country and Italy where certain jobs are very much male dominated. Building, engineering, craftsmanship quality control, even more so when, I wanted to embark on this kind of non-mainstream journey, career that nobody really understood. Can you live out of this, Sandra? Is that just volunteering, or are you going on some, holiday feel-good job? So, of course, at that time, the cluster in the shape and form we know it now did not exist yet. But meeting to coordinate came up really naturally. At the time, myself, for Oxfam GB and UNHCR, in Colombo, we started on a rooftop meetings as much as the ground floors were still wet in Colombo outskirts. I remember, and, two leading women as well at the time, Lizzie on the call, probably Jo de Silva, but many more women online today were deployed at exactly the same moment and started working as part of the reconstruction teams in Aceh, in India, in Thailand. So I think that was really that moment that prompted, and that was 20 years back. So heading a male team then and pushing for owner or community-driven reconstruction, Caroline, was really daunting. I still can remember some of my engineer team telling me, oh, no, Sandra, I don't have time to talk to people, let alone to women's groups. That was hard. I was the only woman then at the time, a shelter focal point within the organization. I think CARE had one, but none other organization had a paid permanent shelter staff in headquarters in global roles. Then, of course, came more the continued willingness to deploy, call for action, trying to, strive at life and work balance with the GIZ. I had one baby, brought her along to Asia, and adding also a caregiver in my own contract. Coordination on sustainable reconstruction took a different dimension. So, of course, there was much about, oh, yes, we have to link humanitarian to recovery and reconstruction. But, of course, then I stayed on myself. But then Pakistan earthquake that was mentioned before took the spotlight. I realized how emergency work had very short attention spans and people moved on very quickly. And I needed to do the same, but find my place again. So let's fast forward to 2009. So I started working with the IPRC and, as you mentioned, the visionary Graham Saunders. Whoever crossed his path knows how contagious optimism, his outstanding capacity to bring people together, his life, and just his legacy. So coordination then for me was just taken to the next level. The teams were established, large-scale deployments, systems, tools, guidance, websites, all of that. So as Neil said, and the colleagues, Haiti 2010. I had joined the IFRC, but basically still had a 7-month-old baby and a 2-year-old. So that decisions to deploy and to basically join the muddy base camp in Port-au-Prince was a hard one. In Haiti, for me, coordination was set up over the months in these rub holes, containers. Many of you remember the airport strip meetings or the empty pool and the unfinished buildings there. So, the sweat and dust, pouring rain, and across many organizations, I think that was an incredible task to bring 400 organizations together and work on that. Many women then were deployed. So that was also, the scale had become important. Many had to make compromises, stayed on and made a huge difference. Yet this constant feeling of incompleteness or guilt for not being enough there as a mom or not enough there as a humanitarian professional, I think many of you can relate to that. As mothers, as young fathers as well, of course, but that is something that continued haunting us in deployments. In Haiti, Caroline, we designed and developed many methodologies, I think, that really engage with community and notably with women. The shelter cluster was the conduit that helped agencies to disseminate such efforts, pushing not just the technical solutions, but identifying new areas of work, notably inclusion, disability, Leanne on the call, all under one roof. That all started there. So from there on, I think that was the moment of sparking strong professionalization of the sector. Master courses flourished, many shelter women alternating, teaching to practice, headquarter roles and deployments. We started establishing profiles for each function, rosters, showing a pathway for careers and consultancies, and also new roles emerged, environmental specialists, HLP, IM, all of that. So I think that dedication paid off. empowered women groups in Nepal emerged much stronger, invited to take part in our shelter fora. Women in Lebanon stood up in coordination meetings. I myself remember in Sri Lanka going back many years after for a housing project. So one of our beneficiaries, a tiny woman in a sari, stood up and said, I was desperate. I lost my sons during the war and my home. I tried to commit suicide twice, but then the shelter cluster supported me to start all over. I didn't know how to hold a hammer, and now I know how to build a whole new house. So that was, of course, rewarding. Case studies emerged, and many gender analysis pushed also agencies to look through the shelter cluster to bring more equity in pay, recognition, rewards. Not perfect, but a good start. Lastly, of course, many crises multiplied as well, and funding stagnated, as you've seen in the graphs. I still admire many women in shelter cluster roles from Mozambique to Madagascar, many of you online, leaving families behind for months or being the sole breadwinners in large families. Lastly, I redeployed in South America, and this brings me all the way to 2016. Choices are never easy. And of course, when I ask myself, the work-life balance formula, no one gets it right. So yes, I have to tell my kids, no, darling, I won't be there to bake the cakes for the next school trip, but I can come to your class explaining how to prepare for a next earthquake, maybe. So as Caroline mentioned, when COVID locked us up in 2020, it generated a new way for bonding and connecting online. The group that you just mentioned on the shelter WhatsApp or in LinkedIn flourished. I think we exploded the maximum number of 460 that were admitted online. So who's not in, you don't know what you're missing. But of course, wider groups and online technical expertise started flourishing. But many amazing colleagues produced, the small miracle in a world that nothing seems to withstand 15 seconds on online attention. So creating a support group with trust, compassion, professionalism, woman power, and somehow conscious living this humanitarian work. So I'm just winding up. I hope that this little piece of this journey can also, help you to calmly reflect, the younger generation, especially on your own career, what moments you recognized, where you wish to be, which roles you see for the future in this outstanding global shelter cluster and beyond. And as we celebrate maybe the progress made up to 2025, I think one thing is just certain: the future won't follow a straight line. And as new opportunities will arrive for all of us, I think we just need to keep on learning, keep stretching, and keep building the kind of leadership for women as well that drives the change that we would like to see. Thank you very much, Caroline. Over to you and the next colleague.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sandra, for sharing all of those thoughts and some, personal challenging decisions you had to make over the years about to deploy, not to deploy, family, all of that. And it leads me to Basma, who works in Yemen for Yemen Family Care Association, so an organization I understand is specifically focused on caring responsibilities. And I wonder about you, and all of these discussions around caring responsibilities, pregnancy, motherhood, and also identity more broadly, that shape women's career. How has that influenced your own choices and the opportunities you've seen and you've taken in the sector? Thank you, and over to you, Basma.
Yes. Thank you so much, Caroline, and thank you for the space to reflect on this important question. Actually, when we talk about how care responsibilities, motherhood, and identity shape women's career, for me, this is not an abstract discussion. It is something I have lived through at different stages of my journey in the shelter humanitarian sector. From my early on, I realized that being a woman in the field often means constantly balancing visibility and responsibility. There were moments when opportunities come at exactly the same time as family obligations. And in those moments, the real challenge was not my ability to do the work. It was the structure around the work. The unspoken assumptions is often that commitment looks one way: full availability, full mobility, and no interruptions. But life does not always work that way, especially for women. Pregnancy and motherhood in particular can shift everything, not because a woman becomes less capable, but because systems are not always built to adapt. Short contracts, emergency deployments, travel expectations, and rigid schedules can suddenly turn into invisible barriers. I have personally seen strong, talented women step back, not because they lack ambition, but because they lacked institutional support. And each time that happens, the sector loses experience, leadership, and continuity. My identity and background have also shaped how I move through this sector. Being a woman from a crisis-affected context means you sometimes have to work twice as hard to be seen as both credible and strategic. You are expected to to understand the field perfectly, yet you may not be always included in the spaces where decisions are made. In the same time, I want to say this clearly. I have also seen incredible strength among women in this sector. I have seen women support one another informally when formal support was missing. I have seen women carry entire programs while also carrying families. I have seen women insist on being present in rooms where they were not originally expected to speak and then change the direction of the whole conversation. For me personally, I learned that survival in this sector is not just about resilience. It's about setting boundaries, asking for flexibility, and sometimes saying no, even when you are afraid that saying no might cost you an opportunity. I also learned that it is not enough to succeed individually. We have responsibility to push for systems that make it easier for the women who come after us. Because inclusion is not just about inviting women into the room, it's about how the room itself is designed. Are contracts flexible? Are policies realistic for women with care responsibilities? Are security protocols designed with gendered risks in mind? Are national staff and younger practitioners seen as future leaders or only as implementers? The shelter sector is about, as we all know, is about dignity, protection, and safety. And I strongly believe that these values must start within our own organizations. Women should not have to choose between leadership and caregiving. Motherhood should not slow down a career, and nationality should never limit whose expertise is trusted. If there is one thing my journey has taught me, it is this. Caring responsibilities did not weaken my leadership, they deepened it. They sharpened my decision making, strengthened my empathy, and made me more accountable to the communities we serve. So, yes, these identities and responsibilities have shaped my choices. Sometimes they narrowed my options, sometimes they delayed my opportunities, but they also shaped the kind of leader I become. And they are exactly why I believe the future of the shelter sector must be more flexible, more representative, and more human. Thank you so much, Caroline, and I hope that answers your question, and over to the next colleague.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Basma, for illustrating some of the challenges that women face, particularly women in the sector when we have the job structure and the requirements that the job requires us to do in terms of travel, but also the instability of our contracts and what happens when we start having caring duties. Um, I want to. I'm looking at time, and I realize we have one more speaker, who I believe has some internet challenges, but hopefully you can speak, Marta. And I wanted to turn to you for some reflections about your own journey and what the future may look like for future generation in the 10 years to come or more. And what what should the sector look like for mothers, carers, women of color, national staff, younger and more senior practitioners? What are some of the examples of contracts or policies that will make the sector a safer and fairer sector for women. If you have a few thoughts you can share with us, Marta. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Caroline. And my internet is a bit up and down, but I hope I can make. Can you hear me? First,
we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. So thinking about my own journey in the sector, I joined the Shutter cluster in 2008. And the passion being, you know, a refugee coming from a country of conflict where I fled to Cote d'Ivoire, that even gave me that passion to work in the humanitarian sector, especially looking at shelter as one of the primary assistance that you need when you are displaced, because you are out there. You may have food, but without a shelter, and Bismarck mentioned it very well regarding dignity and safely, you need shelter over your head. Now, starting from 2008, 2009, I took up the coordination role of the shelter cluster. And when I looked in the room, they were all male, but it didn't deter me because I saw it from the eyes, you know, looking at me. Some were staring at me. Who is this woman coming in to come and discuss and talk about coordination? But I didn't deter. It made me stronger. And I said to myself, I will sit at the table. And this is what gave me that enthusiasm to continue working in the shelter sector or shelter cluster. Now, when we look at today from where I joined the sector in 2008, and today I've seen a lot of improvement in terms of more women coming on board and even sitting around the table. And I'm proud to say, Bismarck, I think it's a coincidence that we are both on this webinar. And in Yemen, I just came from Yemen 2003 as the Senior Shelter Cluster Coordinator. And Bismarck was one of the driving force when it comes to inclusion of women in the sector. So she was leading the Shelter Cluster, developed a kind of a working group called Inclusive Programming, looking at the centrality of protection and the accountability to affected population. And Bismarck, being a Yemeni national, was leading that. Another thing I saw in Yemen are women-led organizations. So we had, as past from those past years, quite recently, we saw a lot of women at the table. They were representing the agency in cluster meeting in the strategic advisory group. And one thing that struck me most is not only about including women living with disability that are women. And I witnessed that in Yemen, a women-led organization is led by, you know, persons with disability, and they made several strides in moving the shelter cluster, you know, forward. And most of the achievements can be alluded to that particular group. Now, moving forward, what do we want to see? As Bismarck and Sandra and other speakers have mentioned, including the reports from the survey, the findings, talk about discrimination, talk about because I'm colored. I think within the shelter cluster, we have donors, we have agencies who are members. So moving forward to ensure an inclusive shelter cluster, we need to have more women and also create room for women with disability so that they can also work. Also, Bismarck talked about the issue of contrast. And sometimes if you want to deploy, then you think, oh, if we send a woman, maybe she will get pregnant and then it will disrupt, you know, the program. But I said no to it. Even when the woman is pregnant, she can still do it. Even when the woman have disabilities, she can still do it. So I want to encourage the donors, the partners within the sector to make sure that we bring women within the cluster, not to just represent and sit at the table, but be the center of decision making. Because with that, it can drive the way the cluster see how we design different type of cluster designs to make it inclusive, looking at persons with disability, looking at older persons. And I say because of that, and has up to Bismarck or leadership has helped us in Yemen to look at even the non-food items that we designed, making sure that the voices of women, of persons with disability were included. So thank you ever so much, Caroline, and I hope I'd answer your questions. Because of the time, I made it so short, and open for any question from the panelists. Over.
Thank you so much, Marta. Really, really interesting to hear your journey, and some of your key recommendations on the future, and encouraging women to continue applying, regardless of their journey and where they would like to be, and regardless of their family situation, to really lean in and apply and continue interacting in the sector. Without further ado, I'd like to hand back over to Jim for the final part of this webinar. Thank you very much, and thanks for giving us the space to talk about some of the experience of women in the sector. Over.
Thank you so much, Caroline, Marta, Basma, and Sandra. I think that was excellent. We don't have time for questions directly to be discussed, but if you do have questions, please put them into the chat. We'll try and answer them by writing as we wrap up over the next few minutes. In a couple of minutes, we will be wrapping up, and we'll be looking forward to tomorrow's webinar. But before we do that, I'm down for a retrospective of technical coordination, which could take an hour and a half on its own. But what I would like to do is just to show you 2 or 3 images, which I think are a microcosm of how technical coordination and technical guidance has actually developed, and how that reflects different interests and understandings over the last 20 years. And we're going to look at how to tie a plastic sheet. This is on this slide. I hope everybody can see it. The first ever drawing, I think, from 1973, from the first plastic sheeting guidance. You can see it's pretty easy to understand. But it's just the corner of the plastic sheet itself tied with one string with one very simple knot. Next, please. Jump to 2004, just before the birth of the shelter cluster, and things have got a little better in terms of the actual techniques, because here you have a stone, something that looks stronger than a string. There's still some things to improve, and I want to jump forward to that. Next one. And here you have it, a bit more guidance on actually how to wrap the rope around the plastic sheeting a couple of times. From plastic sheeting, the guidance on its own from 2007 from Joseph Ashmore. Next, please. And then this is interesting. This is a big development through shelter cluster guidance. Here, the best option hasn't really changed, but now you can see that there are options, and there are things you can do to incrementally improve, as shown from 2008. Next one. And then as we go into more modern versions, you can see actually a process, an attempt by the IEC materials to show how something goes inside, how it's wrapped, and how the knots are tied. Next one. And finally, a couple of different things. One is that modern technology for drawing has gotten better. It's meant that we can add more details, but it's also meaning that there's more acknowledgement on the right-hand side of localized materials that can be used, and a range of different things that might be found in local sites where there's need for shelter. So in an encapsulation, I would say that generally, technical guidance has done 2 things over the last 20 years. 1, embraced graphic technology, and 2, become more localized at the same time. Thank you very much. I'm handing back to Neil for the wrapping up. Oh, and before I do, all of this comes from the brilliant book produced originally by IOM, which is on the Global Shelter Cluster website. Can you go back one slide, Neil? Well, what back one slide? 2 slides now. That's the one. We can put the link into the chat, but it's this one, the Shelter Compendium, and they're all there. And many, many thanks to all artists and authors and to the compilers as well. Neil, it's all yours.
Thanks, Jim. Well, I guess that concludes an hour and a half of looking back on 20 years, an hour and a half. Did that give it justice? I'm not sure. But thank you for everyone who's presented. Thank you for everyone who's commented in the chat, everyone who attended. Maybe I'll hand over to Pablo and Seki, and they can give us a preview of what's coming up in the next couple of days. Or if they're not there.
No.
Oh. Thank you, no, thank you, everyone. Tomorrow we are going to hear a little bit more of how the standards and policies have evolved for the past 20 years. Jean gave us a quick snapshot today, but Mandy and Pascal and a few others are going to take us through 20 years of shaping shelter, the role of standards and policies yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So I hope you join us tomorrow as well. Thank you very much for everyone who intervened today, and over to you, Seki, to close it.
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute. So yeah, no, thank you, everybody, for joining, and I hope you found it really fascinating to step back in time, as well as looking forward. So really, thanks, everybody, and we really hope that you will join us for the whole week whenever you can. There will be recordings as well, but it's always good to be part of the conversation. So thanks so much, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.